There's a specific moment, brief, silent, almost imperceptible, when a woman decides deep down that she desires someone. And it's not when he declares himself, not when he pays the bill, much less when he showers her with compliments. It's when he masters the invisible art of tension. Not the tension of effort, of trying, or of desperation for approval, but the tension that pulses in the subtext of a word, in the calculated rhythm of a sentence, or in the accidental touch that lasts half a second longer than expected. Most men fail not for lack of looks, money, or status. They fail because they're obvious, because they say everything they think, because they show everything they feel, and what is fully revealed is emotionally disposable. The modern woman isn't turned on by predictability. She's turned on by what she doesn't fully understand. She desires what challenges her emotionally. What makes her question, what did he mean by that? Is he flirting with me, or just being nice? It's in this gap between certainty and doubt that sexual tension is born. And that's where the ordinary men are eliminated, and the true seducers begin to play. Nietzsche said that what is done for love is always beyond good and evil. But what about what is done for desire? The desire that isn't expressed in words, but in pauses, in glances, in codes disguised as silly jokes. Desire, unlike love, is a force that transgresses, that doesn't ask for permission. And so to access it, you need to abandon logic, prudence, and the need to be understood. You need to learn to provoke without touching, to suggest without declaring, to generate profound reactions with minimal actions. It seems like magic, but it's technique. It seems like instinct, but it's structure. And the curious thing, it all begins with a small deviation in language, a small breakdown of predictability, a dissonance that awakens her emotional brain, like a silent alarm, saying, "There's something here I can't decipher, and that's why I want it." Sexual tension isn't built in bed, it's built beforehand, between the lines of a conversation that seems innocent, but is meticulously crafted to plant mental images, bodily sensations, and involuntary anticipations. The philosopher Ortega y Gasset said that surrender is born of fascination. Fascination, here, is the elegant name for well-managed tension. And fascinating a woman doesn't require you to be extraordinary, just that you know how to create the atmosphere that makes her imagine scenes she wouldn't dare admit out loud. That's the power of tension, transforming doubt into desire. So no, this video isn't about pickup lines, ready-made phrases, or how to make her laugh. This is a map for building sexual tension with strategic, psychological, and instinctive intelligence. We'll dismantle the game that begins with a simple, ambiguous word and ends with her pulling your hand under the table. We'll understand how every gesture, every pause, every glance can become a trigger. We'll reveal why the secret to tension lies in saying less, but suggesting more. And in the end, you'll never see high the same way again. Now take a deep breath. Forget everything you think you know about seduction, and prepare to access the kind of power few have the courage to use. There's a hidden language in seduction that most men ignore. Subtext. What you say is irrelevant compared to how you say it. And how you say it, in turn, is irrelevant compared to what she understands, or rather what she imagines. The human brain, especially the female brain in a social context, is a factory of interpretations. It's constantly trying to decode intentions, map threats, anticipate moves. And it's precisely in this silent chaos that the true seducer plants his message. Not as a sentence, but as a stimulating doubt. When a man looks at a woman and says, "This dessert is turning me on," he's not talking about sex. But he is. Her brain knows it, and that's the point. He's teasing without declaring it, activating her imagination with a key called emotional ambiguity. This key is powerful because it generates doubt, and doubt is a catalyst for desire. The woman begins to wonder, is he serious? Was that just a joke? Does he find me attractive? Each of these questions generates an emotional discharge, and each emotional discharge creates a micro-bond, a psychological bond, an invisible thread of tension that begins to envelop her, even if she doesn't realize it. Now here's the secret that almost no one teaches. Tension isn't born from direct praise. It's born from disguised praise. It's not about saying you look beautiful, but about looking at her and saying, you should stop teasing her like that. The impact doesn't come from the phrase itself. It comes from the mental image it triggers. This is applied psychology. The female brain associates sensory words with concrete stimuli. If you say delicious, haughty, tasty, you're not being vulgar. You're activating the limbic system, which is the same system that responds to touch, scent, memories, and arousal. And that's why these words have so much power, especially when they're used outside of expected context. An example, you're drinking a regular drink. As you taste it, you look at her and say with a slight smile, "This one turned me on a little." Natural, ironic, unpretentious, but on the inside, surgically calculated. Because you're not talking about the drink, you're testing her brain. If she smiles, if she bites her lip, if she looks down, you've activated the trigger. And that small movement is like lighting the first candle in a dark room. This is where the concept of layers of intention comes in. You never communicate just one thing, you communicate levels. The surface is always rational, the drink, the flavor, the context. But beneath that lies a symbolic layer. When applied well, it transforms any innocent conversation into fertile ground for sexual tension. It's not manipulation, it's refinement. It's not trickery, it's emotional orchestration. And great seducers understand this like maestros. But let's dismantle the most overlooked point, predictability. The problem with most men is that they're literal. They say what they think, ask for what they want, explain what they feel. But desire doesn't arise from explanation. Desire arises from the contrast between what is understood and what is felt. This is seduction. Not making everything clear, but leaving everything charged with possibilities. A game of emotional mirrors. A labyrinth of unresolved intentions. Because deep down, pleasure isn't in receiving the answer, but in being led by questions that excite. And here lies a brutal contradiction. While you try to be clear to avoid rejection, she's looking for signs of complexity to surrender to. A woman doesn't fall in love with the predictable. She's attracted to the enigma. To the man who doesn't try to impress, but who leaves trails of curiosity. Trails she wants to follow. Trails that make her imagine. Because what makes her desire you isn't what you show, it's what you masterfully conceal. Cleopatra, considered one of the greatest seductresses in history, rarely made explicit statements. Her strength lay in her mystery. In the intelligence with which she guided simple conversations into layers of sophisticated tension. The philosopher Plutarch described her presence as a multi-stringed instrument. She moved from one tone to another with hypnotic ease. This is the model, a play of verbal vibrations. You don't enter with direct desire. You enter lightly, but with an invisible intention behind it. And therein lies the key point. Sexual tension isn't created with words. It's created with words plus pause, tone. The tone is the soul of the message. The pause is the space where her imagination works. That's why when you say something ambiguous and remain silent, she feels a chill down her spine. The silence after the sentence is more seductive than the sentence itself. Because there, in that interval, she projects. She completes what you haven't said. And when her mind begins to complete it, you're already in. Now imagine two men. One says, "You're so sexy." The other tastes a drink and says, "That taste reminded me of something. Never mind." Who's more likely to spark desire? The first delivers. The second instigates. And this second is the kind of man women think of in the shower before bed or when they pass by a similar scent. Not because he was explicit, but because he triggered unresolved memories. Leticia Felisberto illustrates this perfectly when she shares a seemingly silly example. A simple orange juice became a source of laughter and tension because it was associated with a hidden memory, an inside joke, an erotic reference that wasn't fully explained. That's the secret. When a woman realizes there's something hidden in what you say, she becomes complicit in the game. And sexual tension is nothing more than complicity, disguised as casualness. But to achieve this, you need to master what I call ingratiating vocabulary. These are common words with a sensory charge. Delight, desire, provocation, little sin, naughty, temptation. When applied calmly, with a light laugh and a well-timed glance, these words transform any conversation into a field of invisible tension. And the woman feels it. Even if she denies it, even if she laughs, even if she changes the subject, she felt it. And that's enough. It's not about being funny. It's about being provocative. It's not about seducing with intensity. It's about seducing with intelligence. Because what differentiates the seducer from the desperate is simple. The seducer knows he doesn't need to say everything, because he knows that sometimes the most powerful word is the one that leaves space for her mind to fill with desire. And it's in this silence that she surrenders without realizing it. Because imagination is the most pleasurable trap there is, and you've just learned how to build it with a phrase, a tone, and a slight smile that never explains everything. Touching a woman isn't about touching, it's about communicating. And the mistake that destroys ordinary men every day is not understanding that touch is a language, subtle, silent, but decisive. You don't put your hand on her. You send a code. You test a threshold. You invite her body to respond. And if she responds, the game changes. Because now it's no longer you getting closer. It's her body allowing it. And this kind of permission isn't asked for with words. It's felt, it's provoked, and it's perceived. But let's get straight to the point no one talks about. If you touch in the wrong way, at the wrong time, without correctly reading your emotions, you don't just miss the opportunity, you create a blockage. The female brain classifies the gesture as invasive. It doesn't matter if it was on the shoulder, the arm, or the hand. If she wasn't ready, if there was no tension, if you touched too soon, her body freezes. And this blockage doesn't return to square one, it returns to a negative point. Because what was simply a neutral encounter becomes an unconscious discomfort. And from then on, everything you do will be filtered by the memory of that hasty gesture. That's why a true seducer never forces a touch. He elicits a physical response. He observes the space, he reads the signals, and he only moves forward when her body invites him, even if discreetly. Because the secret isn't in coming closer, it's in being called without her saying so. This starts with nonverbal language, the forward lean of her body, the way she positions her arms, the way her leg subtly turns toward you, the louder laugh, the shoulder that touches yours by accident. All of this is the body saying, "Test me." And if you understand this invitation, then the touch isn't an invasion. It's continuity. But there is a key moment, and that moment reveals itself in the response to the first contact. Imagine you're talking to her. Everything flowing, laughter, glances. In a light gesture, you touch her arm as she laughs. If she doesn't back away, that's already a partial green light. If she touches you back, it's completely unresponsive. But if she shifts position, makes that subtle gesture of fixing her hair while pulling away, you get the idea. The timing is broken. The tension wasn't ripe, and insisting now is sealing your rejection. Because touch, when it doesn't match the energy of the moment, is perceived as tentative, and a man who tries too hard is perceived as needy. Neediness kills tension. Leticia Felisberto masterfully demonstrated this during the podcast by demonstrating the gesture of silent rejection. The woman who pretends to fix her hair just to push the man's hand away. This is sophisticated because she doesn't reject him directly, she disconnects him. And if the man doesn't understand this code, he insists. And each insistence is another brick in the wall of no. Her body is saying something her mouth will never verbalize. And that's why reading the touch is more important than the touch itself. But now let's go to the opposite extreme. The accepted and amplified touch. When you touch her arm, and instead of backing away, she holds your hand, or intertwines your fingers, or comments on the size of your hand compared to hers. That's no longer a green light, that's a black card with a VIP pass. That's the point where tension becomes physical, imagination becomes action, and desire becomes body. One of the most iconic moments Leticia recounts is when a woman interlocks her fingers with a man, holds them, and comments, "Look how small my hand is next to yours." This seemingly innocent gesture is a silent cry. I want you closer. It's the point of no return. From this interlocking of fingers onward, if the man doesn't take action, he communicates insecurity. And insecurity at this stage is an anticlimax. It kills the tension. And what could have been a kiss turns into confusion. Because her body opened the door, and you hesitated. Hesitation is the killer of seduction. This is where the idea of progressive escalation of physicality comes in. You don't start by touching. You start by creating the atmosphere. And that atmosphere is made up of glances, pauses, ambiguous language, and reduced space. Then the light touch, then the lingering touch, then the reciprocal touch. And then the moment of fusion. Hands that intertwine, arms that intertwine, heads that tilt. All this without a word about kissing, sex, or desire. Because desire is implicit. The body has already declared it. Now all that's left is action. But to get to that point, you need to understand a fundamental law of physicality. Intimacy is built through progression and silent permission. And herein lies the brutal contradiction. The less you try to touch, the more likely you are to be touched naturally. Because touch isn't something you impose, it's something you earn. Effective touch arises from a climate of connection, not an invasive attitude. It's a result of the psychological tension you've created previously. The woman needs to feel that touching you is inevitable, not a surprise. Touch must feel like a logical consequence of the chemistry you're building, and that only happens when you're focused not on touching, but on provoking the desire to be touched. And this leads us to a deeper provocation. Sexual tension is in fact a dance of control. Who touches and who allows, who leads and who follows, who risks and who consents. The great seducer dominates this dance not because he invades, but because he masterfully suggests. He tests, retreats, advances, observes, adapts. He understands that each body is a territory, and every territory has its doors, its walls, and its secret signals. And only those who study the map can enter without being expelled. The French philosopher Merleau-Ponty said that the body is the expression of the being in the world. In other words, everything a person feels, they express through their body. If they're uncomfortable, they close themselves off. If they're curious, they lean in. If they desire, they approach. And the man who ignores these signals is playing chess blindfolded. Seduction isn't about talking more, it's about perceiving better. It's about mastering the space, time, and energy between two bodies that haven't yet touched, but are already teasing each other silently. Now understand the most brutal. Physicality isn't just about touch, it's about positioning. It's about how you move, where you sit, how you occupy the space. A man who understands tension sits close enough to be noticed, but far enough away to be desired. He doesn't invade, he invites. And with each movement she makes toward him, he responds calmly, not hurriedly. Because he knows that tension builds in the interval between gesture and response. And when the touch finally happens, the real, the accepted, the desired, he doesn't treat it as a victory. He treats it as a transition, as a gateway to a new level of connection. He doesn't celebrate, he keeps playing. Because a true seducer doesn't just want the touch, he wants the surrender. And that surrender only comes when the woman feels that she's still in control, even if he's planned every second since the first glance. Well-built physical tension doesn't just lead to a kiss, it creates a bodily memory, an emotional record she carries with her days later. It's the kind of touch she feels again when she hears a song, when she walks into a similar bar, when she remembers the conversation that preceded the moment. And that's when the game solidifies, when you're no longer just a presence. You're a sensation that lingers in her body, even after you've left. And all of this begins with the first touch, or rather with the right moment to touch. And knowing when that moment is what separates the one who desires from the one who is truly desired. She can resist a compliment, she can dodge a touch, she can ignore an advance. But there are two things that, when used well, break down any emotional defense: the right voice in the right tone, and a look that doesn't need to ask permission. In a world of visual stimuli, where attention is hijacked every second by colors, curves, and empty promises, what truly seduces isn't what's shown, it's what's suggested with presence. And presence isn't about being close. Presence is about making oneself felt, even in silence. And this power is condensed into two underrated resources: timbre and gaze. Let's start with the voice. The voice is more than sound, it's chemistry. It travels through the ear and activates the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotions, pleasure, and memory. A study from the University of British Columbia revealed that deeper, slower, and more rhythmic voices are perceived as more seductive. But why? Because they convey security, they convey control, they convey emotional dominance. And deep down, female desire is attracted to signals of stability and unpredictability at the same time. The deep voice with its controlled rhythm says, "I command," but it's the unexpected rhythm, the calculated pause, the whisper in the middle of a sentence that says, "I can surprise." The right voice isn't just deep, it's intentional. It speaks less, it pauses. It leaves space for the female mind to work, because her mind needs to complete what you haven't said. And it's in this space that desire insinuates itself. When you say, "You can't imagine what just went through my head," and fall silent, she'll think of 1,000 possibilities. And all of them are more powerful than any direct statement, because now it's her imagination working against her. And that's tension in its raw state. But the voice alone is a blunt knife. What cuts is the gaze. The gaze is the rawest and most direct instrument of sexual tension. Not that fixed, forced stare that seems rehearsed, but the look that appears mid-sentence, that intensifies at the end of a joke, that stops time for 3 seconds in the middle of the bar table. This look, when held at the right moment, without blinking, without anxiety, says, "I see you," beyond the conversation. And it's this kind of look that melts away layers of defense. Most men look at a woman as if asking for something: attention, affection, validation. A seducer looks as if he has something to give: intensity. When she feels that your gaze carries presence, she feels seen, not in her body, but in her soul. And when a woman feels truly seen, she allows herself to feel. Because her emotional security no longer depends on control, she is already immersed in the field of tension. And here comes the most refined dance: the interplay between voice, gaze, and pause. When you say something softly, fix your eyes on her, and then fall silent, you create an emotional vacuum. And the vacuum is always filled by what is most repressed. And what is repressed? Desire. The touch that never happened, the kiss that hasn't come yet, the tension she hasn't named but already feels pulsing. And what's more, a woman falls in love not with what you said, but with what she felt in the space between your words. It's in this space that her body responds. It's in this silence that her heart races. Because you're not just talking, you're conducting an emotional rhythm. And rhythm, when mastered, is hypnosis. Robert Greene explains this perfectly in The Art of Seduction when he describes the enchanter, the one who captivates not through force, but through atmosphere, who speaks softly yet with authority, who never shows need but always insinuates desire. The enchanter doesn't pressure, he engages, and the power of his voice lies in always seeming comfortable with silence. Because those who are comfortable in silence are the ones who command the atmosphere. And this is exactly where so many go wrong. They talk too much, they explain too much, and when they do speak, they speak with tension, with agitation, with excessive justification. The voice doesn't convey desire, it conveys anxiety. And the gaze doesn't connect, it watches, implores, waits for a response. This doesn't generate tension, it drains. The seducer, on the other hand, speaks little, but carries presence in every syllable. He understands the power of intonation. He knows that a common phrase, spoken with intention, becomes memorable. He can say, "You're funny," and sound like everyone else. Or you can say, "You know you provoke me, right?" With a low voice, a pause at the end, a penetrating gaze, and a restrained smile, and trigger an emotional earthquake in 3 seconds. And this is the key point. The tension that lasts the longest is the one that seems accidental but was planned. The woman can't sense you're performing a technique, but she needs to feel that something different happened in that moment, that your voice wasn't ordinary, that your gaze carried more weight, that your silence said more than any sentence, and that for a moment she felt vulnerable. That's the real impact. So when mastering your voice, don't just think about volume. Think about vibration, frequency, strategic pauses, saying a sentence and waiting for her to react, not with words but with her body. The involuntary smile, the averted gaze, the bitten lip. These are the signs that say she felt it. And with your gaze, don't focus on her entire face. Focus on her eyes, then her mouth, then back to her eyes. This movement, done slowly, calmly, and silently, is read as anticipation of a kiss. Even if you don't kiss, because a look can touch deeper than a hand itself when it carries intention. The big secret is to appear comfortable with the atmosphere you're creating. Don't apologize for the silence. Don't justify your tone of voice. Don't break your gaze out of nervousness. Hold it, sustain it, carry the tension as if to say, this is just the beginning. And that changes everything. Because what truly excites a woman isn't the right phrase. It's the man who can carry the weight of his own presence without breaking the mood. The voice and the look together are like a bow and arrow. One prepares, the other hits. One seduces, the other confirms. One sets the mood. The other executes the impact, and the two combined are capable of undoing even the most rational woman. Because deep down, her body has already decided before her mind formulates it. And it all started with a tone, a silence, a look. And here we finish building the tension. But the game isn't over, because now that she's felt it, everything that comes after will be filtered by desire. And you don't have to do anything else. Just continue being the same man who dominated the atmosphere, with restrained words, precise gestures, and a look that didn't ask for permission to enter. You've come this far and realized, real seduction isn't found in obvious compliments, direct advances, or hasty touches. It lives in the subtext, in the pause, in the silence that screams louder than any romantic phrase. A man who masters this doesn't need to convince, he simply arouses. He doesn't beg for attention, he magnetizes. And this magnetism isn't luck, it's not a gift, it's not innate charisma, it's code reading, it's a hidden language. It's a psychological mastery of the game that most will never understand. A woman senses when you're in control. When you don't speak to impress, but to insinuate. When your gaze doesn't ask, but penetrates. When your touch isn't a request, it's a response to what her body has already authorized without words. And it's at that moment that tension transforms into physical desire. When her body wants it before she can even think about it. And that power, either you have it or you learn it. But if you want to truly learn, not just flirt with these ideas but master them, then you need access to the sharpest, most forbidden and direct content ever created on the subject. The Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds. This isn't just another audiobook. It's a psychological weapon packed with raw knowledge. It shatters every lie you've been taught about masculinity, vulnerability, attraction, and social power. And it does so unfiltered. You've been conditioned to believe that opening up makes you more intimate. That's a lie. It makes you disposable. You've been told that being nice is attractive. Wrong. It makes you predictable. You've been taught to please, to understand, to listen. But you've never been taught to provoke, to dominate space, to use silence as a stimulus. And that's exactly what this manual does. It reconfigures you from within, so that your presence does the work that words never could. You will learn that vulnerability isn't charm, it's misplaced weakness. That true attraction is born from the silent tension between opposites, dense, firm, mysterious masculinity, and femininity's inevitable response to it. You'll learn how to see beyond social masks, how to detect emotional games, how to stop falling into traps and start shaping the outcomes. The Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds, isn't about ready-made phrases, it's about reprogramming your energy. So that, in any context, a date, a bar, a small talk, you know how to activate the desire circuit in seconds. Because when you understand the game, you don't play anymore, you dictate the rules. So the challenge remains, choose a woman, today, and test it. With a phrase, with a look, with a touch, lasting seconds. And then listen to the manual. Compare, understand, evolve. Because once you feel this kind of power, going back to being ordinary becomes impossible.